Hello, tube of you. How's it going? So today we're talking about Apple Photos. I'm going to show you how I use Apple Photos and talk about it in the context of my photography. Hopefully that will help you work out if Apple Photos is going to be a good choice for you as well. Here we go. So there's a particular angle I'm coming from on this channel. If you've been hanging around a little bit, you'll have already picked up on it. And that is that photography should happen behind the camera, with the camera in the world, rather than at your computer in your head. So Apple Photos has actually been kind of more or less a partner on my journey of discovery to what photography means to me. So I'm all about straight out of camera. I'm all about JPEG, and I try to learn my cameras so I can get it right in camera. If I was still shooting raw and editing, that might mean that Apple Photos wouldn't work for me. So I guess a part of what I want to say is that what is it about your photography and your photos that requires more than Apple Photos? And is that a good thing? For me, it wasn't. Moving away from editing and towards Apple Photos, where you can still do some basic editing, which we'll have a look at later. But basically, the good things about Apple Photos are a really streamlined multi-device workflow with basic editing, cloud syncing. Its library management is really simple, but kind of powerful and really easy to use. I think it's somewhere that Apple is really delivering on its brand promise. So yeah, Apple Photos suits my style of photography really well, but I didn't start there. So I've been using all kinds of cameras, not taking a lot of photos back before the iPhone, but when the iPhone came, I really had a camera in my pocket all the time and I started taking a lot of photos. A lot of fun, absolutely loved it. Have so many, I won't say I have a lot of throwaway photos from that time, but at the time I really enjoyed just taking photographs, and that's kind of more what it's about for me. But you see, that's now, but in between these times, there's a period where I started to get into photography more. I had like a DSLR, started to get into mirrorless, shot raw, spent a lot of time editing in Lightroom, and yeah, I kind of started to do my head in a little bit, and it departed from a fun, enjoyable thing to do and became more about a means to an end, the end being the photograph, and more than that, the end being people seeing those photographs and liking them, to kind of, I guess, boost my self-esteem. So I became very externally dependent on other people's opinions of what I was doing, and that was not the best thing. I just had a couple of Lumix mirrorless bodies. I had a Lumix GX7 and I was shooting raw and editing in Lightroom. I'd go out on the streets in Brisbane for a few hours after university and come back and edit them all night instead of studying. I also started to feel overwhelmed by the number of photos that I had in my Lightroom library. It didn't feel easy to manage and find them. I was also really tired of editing photos. I kind of felt that I was approaching the whole thing wrong, but I didn't really know how else I could be doing it. And I did kind of enjoy it, but yeah, it started to feel like I was polishing turds, as we say in Australia. We started planning our trip to Japan in 2015. When I started thinking about this Japan trip, I realized that I was going to take 10,000 photographs, and I did take 10,000 photographs. And I knew that taking 10,000 photographs in RAW would mean a whole kit and caboodle that I didn't have and I wasn't prepared to set up just for this trip. RAW wasn't going to work. But then I started thinking, well, can I shoot JPEG? Will that work? And I decided that I would just try, and it turned out to be absolutely fine. I had a lot of fun, and I've got a lot of great photos from that trip as well. So I'd shoot all day, then when we came back to a cafe or where we were staying or Aiko's parents' house, I would do a Wi-Fi transfer from the Lumix GX7 camera to the iPad, and then I would maybe make a few little tweaks or do a black and white conversion in Apple Photos on the iPad. And then, of course, it would all be synced and uploaded, which is like, I guess, a backup. I also found Apple Photos to be really enjoyable. I kind of had a mental shift during this time. I realized that I didn't want to be doing as much editing on my photos. What I needed to be doing is just taking better photos and then relaxing about it. So I really started working on my photography instead of working on my photographs. So that was 2015, and I went back for another Japan trip at the end of 2017 and again the end of 2019. A little bit overdue right now, but we're going the end of this year. But those 2 second trips, I used an iPhone in both trips. The iPhone 8 Plus on 2017 and the iPhone 11, which I still have now, in the 2019 trip. And that was even simpler and more fun because there was no Wi-Fi transfer. The camera, the phone was in my pocket. It was much easier to take around. A lot of fun. So here's a brief overview of my Apple Photos workflow. So the first thing I do is transfer the photos from the camera to the computer. Sometimes I use the SD card, but more often than not, I just connect the camera by USB-C and transfer them that way. But it actually starts taking the shot. It actually starts with thinking for a few seconds before the shot and planning out what it is you're trying to capture and how and why. If there's one thing I've learned in life, and especially from my design career, is that taking these moments to do some kind of strategy before you start the actual process makes the process itself much smoother and leads to much better results. Just taking a few seconds to think about the photograph before you take the photograph is actually the first step in the process of managing that and processing that photograph afterwards, because it makes all that much simpler. So once the photos are in Lightroom, I generally select and favorite some of them, and I do that by looking at the thumbnails. I don't cycle through them all at full size because the thumbnails give you a really nice overview of the photo without looking at the details too much. Things like the composition and framing and that, you can easily see which one of a set is the best one and which photos are more interesting, because I think it's the overall balance and tones and hues of a photo, as well as the subject matter, that creates interest for your eye. So once I've selected, the ones that I like, I do perhaps, if I need to, I'll do a few basic tweaks in Apple Photos, like exposure, curves, maybe shadows, things like that. Not changing the photograph, just, improving it in small ways. So this is different to what I used to do in Lightroom, which was much more in the realms of changing the photograph. So I was less far along my photographic journey, so my photographic skills with the camera were less, and I was trying to make up for that with technical, analytical skills later on. So that's not what I'm doing now. I've moved everything back into the shooting process as much as possible. So the editing that I do is not changing the photo; it's just improving a few things to add to the photograph. Sometimes I'll do a black and white conversion in Apple Photos as well. Although usually these days, if I want to shoot black and white, I know that ahead of time, and I've actually set the camera to black and white, acros, or monochrome. But occasionally I do take a photo and I want to see how it looks in black and white. So Apple Photos actually has really cool, very simple, easy to use, but quite effective black and white conversion tool. So you have one slider that changes all the hues at once, so you're not altering the tonality of particular colors. It has a neat tone slider and a grain slider. It's pretty quick to get, not the whole result that you might get with a full black and white conversion in Lightroom, but maybe 80% of the way there. And I think that's fine, because that last 20%, it's the hardest but the least effective. It's cool that Apple Photos is saving changes non-destructively, so you can revert or even have a look at the original file at any time by reverting to original in the edit window or pressing M to get a little preview of the original. Apple Photos is kind of working in conjunction with iCloud Photo Library. They're more or less the same thing. I mean, Apple Photos is like a front end for that back end. And it makes sharing to places like Instagram, or, you might upload photos onto your computer, do some tweaking there, or do some tweaking on your devices, and then use your devices to throw them onto Instagram or put them again through VSCO. Actually, let's just quickly talk about how Affinity Photo will integrate with Apple Photos and also lots of other photo apps as well. So you can edit photos, you can use Apple Photos as library management and use other apps as your photo editors, and it works pretty well. It might not be as seamless as library management and editing in one app, but it definitely goes a long way to replacing Lightroom if what you want to do is shoot in RAW or even shoot in JPEG or RAW, and then do some more advanced editing with things like dodging and burning, gradients, things like that. What I like to do though is I have a carousel template in Affinity Photo, and I like to just drag photos out of Apple Photos straight into Affinity Photo, it's basically a Photoshop replacement, and then export the little squares that I then create a carousel with in Instagram. So look, I know that things like Capture One, Lightroom theoretically empower you to do whatever you want with a photograph. But here's the thing. Did you know that in 2015, routers, I do not know what it's called, sent out a message to all their photographers to say, we do not want your edited photographs. Please put your cameras on JPEG and just send us exactly what you get from the camera. That's because they're a news organization and they want to be as transparent as possible. And I guess photographers were taking too much license with their photographs. So I have a concept of what I call the honest photo. And it means you haven't made changes to that photo that move it away from reality. Any changes that you've made have made it closer to reality, if anything. And for me, that's what an honest photo is. And Apple Photos is fine for this type of honest photography. Now, I know that many professional photographers are not doing photography for themselves. They're getting paid to do that for other people, and those people may not want honest photos. And for me, that's the value of Lightroom and Capture One. They exist to allow people to make dishonest photographs. I don't want to say that in a negative sense, but these are photographs that have been commissioned by organizations and businesses that want to present reality as something other than what it is, in order to change people's perceptions in their own favor. And that's not what I want to do with my photography. I don't think I'd want to do that even if I had the chance to do that. That's great, good on them, and good on Lightroom and Capture One and whatever for catering for these professions. But you should be aware, if this is not your end game, then you do not need these applications. Hey there folks, thanks for bearing with me in that last section. I hope you enjoyed so many of my photographs. They were all in chronological order and things I've taken in the last month or so with my new X Pro 3 camera from Fujifilm. Thanks for sticking around. That's all I wanted to say. I hope it got you thinking about what you need, what you want to do. But I'll catch you guys next time. All right, cheers.